The founding director, I almost said the founding father, well, maybe that is true also, the Center for Finance and Security, CFS, at RUSI, where his research focuses on matters at the intersection of finance and security, and that is exactly what we need today. Mr. Tom Keatinge, hello, sir. It's nice to have you
Great to
with
be
us.
back. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, the pleasure is all mine again. First question. As someone who had mastered intelligence and security at King's College, you must surely know all there is to know about organized crime. Can you please shed some light for us? Does Putin's dictatorial regime have the signs and traits of an organized crime group? And if it does, how to treat the disease on an international level?
Well, I think the first thing to say about organized crime groups is that they operate very effectively in an illicit fashion, a clandestine fashion, across borders, transnationally. And it's certainly the case that the Russia regime, the Putin regime, has had to develop over many years, actually, but accelerated as a result of sanctions, transnational covert capabilities, illicit financial networks, procurement networks to continue to fund and resource its illegal war in Ukraine. So certainly, I think you could perhaps go as far as saying that Putin operates a mafia-style state. And of course, that's not new. I mean, that's not new. Russian organized crime has been well known for many years. But I would say that that capability, that sort of perhaps has been in the DNA of the Kremlin for many years, has been put to use by Putin as a result of the difficulties, excellent to say difficulties, but the difficulties that the regime has faced in procurement in these past years.
So what do we do about it? Is there any treatment of that? I mean, we heard stories that Europe and the collective West, we must get united and do exactly what?
Well, it's a good challenge because we are over 1,000 days now into the full-scale invasion. We had
Right.
in Brussels in the middle of November, we had a week-long conference looking at what's happening on sanctions. Are sanctions being effective? How do we make sanctions work better? And fundamentally, I think my message is that we have done okay. But if we want to genuinely restrict this kind of organized crime, cross-border activity of the Russian state, then we need to put ourselves in the same mindset as Vladimir Putin. And that is a mindset for him that is, it's existential. It's existential to avoid sanctions. It's existential to build new procurement networks. And we in the West, as supporters of Ukraine, need to take the same mindset and frankly view ourselves as being at economic war with Russia. And I've said this before, and to be honest, I think policymakers continue to be less strong on sanctions and other economic measures than they need to be because the Kremlin is always ahead.
Kremlin is always ahead. Okay, so you were an investment banker for 20 years at JP Morgan, is that right?
That is correct, sir.
Have you ever invested any Russian money?
I have not invested any Russian money, but I certainly did have the opportunity to travel to Moscow in the early 2000s when Moscow was trying to develop itself as a financial center, for sure.
Can you please explain, frozen Russian assets were abroad, about $300 billion or something. What is a legal problem to unfreeze this money towards Ukraine, the victim of Russian criminal aggression?
I am the first one to say that there should be no restriction on that occurring. I think over the last 12 months, let's say, I think pretty much every argument has been rehearsed, been considered, been reconsidered. And there is no, I think, legal reason why the full $300 billion of central bank reserves could not be taken for the benefit of Ukraine as a kind of prepayment for the much more than $300 billion of reparations that Russia should be required to pay to Ukraine. The fact of the matter is that there are nervous individuals, I think, in particular within the EU, who are concerned about, shall we say, trust in the euro, trust in investing in European assets. I completely disagree with that nervousness, because at the end of the day, the assets were immobilized over 2 years ago.
There we go.
And the euro still exists. The euro bond market still exists. Nothing bad has happened.
Collapsed, right. Okay.
Correct. So I think the fudge that was developed in the summer by the G7 and others, okay, it will deliver eventually, and again, that's been far, far too slow. It will deliver the $50 billion. But really, I think that was, as people like to say in Europe, a Euro fudge, a way of sort of somehow doing something without really coming to an agreement and avoiding the tough decision, which is, what about the 300 billion?
All right. Well, there are a lot of tough decisions been avoided 3 years in a row by now, but Trump is not even in the office, and look what's going on in Europe. I guess we agree. I have to thank the president-elect for that, for starters, at least. What do you think? I mean, the Paris and London thinking about the military sending to Ukraine. So what will happen next in terms of military aid for Ukraine when Trump is actually in the office? What do you think?
Well, I had the opportunity recently to meet with a big group from Ukraine, and it was just after the election of Trump, and it was a kind of, I suppose, an interesting conversation. So the first thing is, under President Biden, yes, there's been support for Ukraine, but the support has been not as strong as I think, certainly I would like, and Ukrainian people for sure would like. Under President Kamala Harris, we probably had the same policy. So, with Trump coming in, things will be different. Now, what we hope is that things will be different in a positive way. I think it's worth remembering that Trump was clearly instrumental in the early arming of Ukraine, as I understand it, when he was president and before the full-scale invasion. The second thing I think is that Trump likes to win. Trump is a deal doer, and Trump judges success through doing deals where he wins. And so the question then is, in the context of Ukraine and Russia's full-scale invasion, what does winning look like to Donald Trump?
Exactly.
I really encourage people, if they haven't read it already, to read Trump's book from the 1980s, The Art of the Deal, because I can tell you that pretty much everything that he did in his first presidency was predicted by that book, as far as I was concerned. His way of thinking and way of seeing the world. So the question is, what does winning look like? I think for Europe, Donald Trump's view of winning in the Ukraine context will require Europe to step up more than it has stepped up so far. If Donald Trump thinks that Europe is not pulling its weight when it comes to weapons, when it comes to potential provision of troops to police a ceasefire, all these kinds of things, then I think Europe's got a problem. So if I were in London, if I were in Paris, if I were in Berlin, assuming Berlin has a government that functions, then I would be thinking very, very hard about how we as a European continent support Ukraine with a reduced presence of Donald Trump. That's the way I think you keep Donald Trump involved.
I take that as an answer. I agree with you very much. And in terms of someone, no one asks me, but if someone would ask what Democrats are for in the United States for the last 4 years, I said that they yielded almost every ground that they had in Ukraine and in the United States to any opposing force. So it just Trump came and took it. And actually, Putin is very close to doing the deals, but different, dirty deals. So he just takes what he wants. He's a dictator. He dictates his will upon those who lack of the one of their own. So definitely, I hope that Europe understands that and will step up in a way. So
I think there's another point that I would make there,
yes,
is that, of course, Trump will be president for only 4 years.
Right.
And Europe and Ukraine want a solution that is permanent. And so I think we need to guard against, and we need to prepare ourselves for Trump to try and do a deal which makes him look great. Because, of course, at the end of 4 years, he doesn't need to be re-elected, right? That's it. He's had his 2 goes at being president. So I think I hope, and I'm sure it's the case, that there is a lot of thinking going on in European capitals, working with the president's office in Ukraine to make sure that there is a European strategy for Ukraine, and that strategy can function with or without the support of an incoming president.
European strategy for Ukraine. Amen to that. And last question for tonight. Sanctions against Russia. Well, Britain sounds serious now, just as everybody else, but yet we in Ukraine find Western components in each and every missile, like every day. Well, I've been asking to close the skies for 3 years in a row by now, but what we see until now, Mr Keatinge, is literally written above our heads in our skies. Just business, nothing personal. Something like that. So do you believe there is a way to actually deprive Russian business under the disguise, of course, of European business or any other business, the American markets, the European markets? Is there a way to do so?
I think there is a realism which has entered this conversation in the last few months, which is that shutting down Russian access to so-called critical high priority items, the microchips and so on, is not possible, but reducing access and increasing cost for accessing those components, I think, is possible. Now, there is clearly circumvention going on. The Russian FSB is clearly running rings around Western sanctions too often. But it's clear, and the evidence that is shared with us from the European Commission, or again people from within Ukraine, is that sanctions are having an effect, but of course they don't have an effect as quickly as I think many naive Western policymakers thought they would have when they were first announced in 2022. And that's why I think we need to focus not just on restricting access to critical high priority items. That is important, and we need to continue working with circumvention countries to achieve that. But we also need to double our efforts on restricting revenue, and that basically comes down to oil. We saw just yesterday, on the 25th of November, we saw the UK government announce designations on more shadow fleet vessels. That's very positive. We hear that before the end of the year, we will see similar moves coming from the European Union. I think this is where we need to really focus our work. We run a maritime sanctions task force at RUSI, trying to encourage policymakers to go more aggressively on this topic. There's great work done by the Kyiv School of Economics that provides a tremendous analytical basis on which to make arguments. There's no excuse not to restrict the Russian export of oil as much as possible, because that is what is fueling the war.
Thank you so very much for saying aloud what I was saying all the time. Oil, oil, oil. It looks like a prayer to me, but it is actually the fact. So thank you very much, Mr. Keatinge. It was a pleasure, and a lot of new and very knowledgeable information, if you ask me. Thank you.
Very good. Stay safe. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so very much. We talk soon. Goodbye. Was the founding director of the Center for Finance and Security at RUSI, Tom Keatinge.